I never expected my marriage to turn into a game. But as I sat across from Mia at our candlelit dinner, watching the way she swirled the wine in her glass, I knew that something was off. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable, something calculated. "Jake," she said, setting her glass down with a deliberate clink, "I've been thinking." That was never a good start. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. She inhaled deeply, as if gathering the nerve to say something she already knew I wouldn't like. "We've been together for 10 years. And I love you, I do. But don't you feel like, I don't know, like maybe we've gotten a little stale?" I blinked. "Stale? Not in a bad way," she rushed to explain, reaching across the table to touch my hand. It was soft, familiar, but I felt an undercurrent of something new. Guilt? Excitement? I just mean we've settled into a routine. Work, dinner, sleep. We hardly even have sex anymore, Jake. And when we do, it's the same every time. I opened my mouth to argue, but she wasn't wrong. Life had become predictable, comfortable. But since when was comfort a bad thing? I narrowed my eyes. "What exactly are you saying?" Mia took another sip of wine before answering, her voice careful, measured. "I want us to try an open marriage." The words hit me like a slap. I jerked back, pulling my hand away as I let out a stunned laugh. "You're joking. I'm serious." "No, Mia. What the hell?" My voice was sharp now, the shock wearing off and making room for something uglier. "You want to screw other people?" She bristled. "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said." Her face twisted in frustration, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Jake, I don't want to leave you. I just think a little freedom could bring something fresh into our relationship. Spice things up." I ran a hand down my face, trying to wrap my head around this. I'd heard of people doing this, but Mia had never even hinted at it before. Where the hell was this coming from? "Is there someone else?" I asked, my voice low. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Of course not. I just think we should have the option. No sneaking, no lies, just honesty. Transparency." I studied her carefully, searching for cracks in her conviction. "And you think this would help us?" She nodded. "Edo. We'd set rules. Boundaries. It wouldn't change how much I love you." I almost laughed. How could it not? I gritted my teeth, my mind reeling. "So what? You just want to go out and start sleeping with random guys?" Her lips pressed together, and there it was, that tiny flicker of hesitation. The part she hadn't said yet. "No," she admitted. "I mean, not random guys. But I think I'd have an easier time than you would." And there it was. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a challenge. Mia was beautiful, confident, and she knew it. She assumed that men would line up at her feet the second she became available. And me? I was just her safe, reliable husband. She thought I'd struggle, that I'd sit at home while she explored her newfound freedom. I leaned back in my chair, my appetite gone. "So, you want to sleep around, and you expect me to just... what? Wait for you to come home?" She scoffed. "You could do it too, Jake. If you can." That last part wasn't said outright, but I heard it loud and clear. If you can. Something cold settled in my stomach. She had already made up her mind. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Just let the silence stretch between us. I wanted to explode, to tell her she was out of her mind, but instead, I forced myself to stay calm. "All right," I finally said, my voice eerily level. "Let's do it." Mia's eyes widened just a fraction. She hadn't expected me to agree so easily. "Wait, really?" I nodded. "Really?" For the first time, I saw a shadow of uncertainty cross her face. Maybe she thought I'd fight harder. Maybe she wanted me to beg her not to go through with it. But I wasn't going to beg, because if Mia wanted to play this game, I was going to make damn sure she lost. That night, we went to a family gathering at her parents' house. Laughter and wine flowed freely, and for a little while, I pushed the conversation with Mia out of my mind. Until Sophie, Mia's younger sister, came up behind me in the kitchen. "So," she murmured, her voice laced with something knowing. "I heard about your little agreement." I turned to her, startled. "What?" She smirked, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. Mia wasn't exactly quiet about it. She told Mom when she thought I wasn't listening. I exhaled, shaking my head. "Jesus." She leaned against the counter, watching me. "You really agreed to this?" Didn't seem like I had much of a choice. Sophie's gaze flickered with something unreadable, something curious. And what are you going to do about it? I shrugged, playing it cool. Guess I'll just have to see what happens. For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips curving into a slow, almost amused smile. You know, she said, her voice low, Mia always did underestimate you. And just like that, something shifted. Maybe this game wouldn't go the way Mia expected after all. Mia wasted no time. The next morning, she was up early, dressed in tight black leggings and a fitted workout top that showed off just enough cleavage to make a statement. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, watching as she hummed to herself while scrolling through her phone. You're in a good mood, I said casually. She looked up and smiled, but there was something different about it. A smugness. Yeah, I have a lot to do today. Like what? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shrugged. Just errands. I didn't press. I knew what she was really doing. She was already diving into this little experiment of hers, probably reinstalling dating apps, fishing for compliments, lining up a date. She wanted this to be easy, and part of me wanted to see her fail. I had no intention of starting anything with another woman right away. Not yet, at least. But I wasn't about to sit back and let her assume I'd be the loser in this game. I had too much pride for that. I grabbed my phone off the counter as she grabbed her keys. As she headed toward the door, she turned back, her expression carefully neutral. What are you up to today? I smiled. I think I'll just see what happens. The words were deliberate. I wanted her to wonder, to question, to feel the tiniest sliver of doubt. Her lips pressed together, but she nodded. Okay, well, have fun. And with that, she was gone. I leaned back in my chair and took another sip of coffee, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. For the first few days, Mia was glued to her phone. I caught her smiling at her screen more than once, biting her lip like a teenager flirting with her crush. She was careful, though. No obvious names, no suspicious behavior. But I could see it, the excitement, the thrill of the hunt. She was convinced she had the advantage. And then there was Sophie. It started small. A few extra texts here and there. Hey, Jake, can you help me move some furniture this weekend? Just saw this new whiskey you'd love. Sending you a pic. Mia's crazy, huh? That last one was sent late at night. At first, I told myself she was just being nice. Sophie had always been friendlier to me than Mia's other family members, but this was different. Subtle. A slow trickle of attention that felt almost calculated. And I couldn't lie to myself. I liked it. Sophie was younger than Mia by 5 years. Where Mia had always been polished, a little high maintenance, Sophie was more laid back, effortless in the way she carried herself. She had long, dark hair that she never seemed to care much about, but somehow always fell perfectly over her shoulders. And she had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when she looked at you. So when she sent that last text, Mia's crazy, huh? I hesitated before responding. Then, finally, I sent back. You have no idea. The dots appeared immediately. Oh, I think I do. I stared at my phone for a long moment, something twisting in my chest. This was dangerous. But wasn't that the point? Meanwhile, Mia was struggling. She thought dating would be as simple as swiping right and choosing from a sea of men eager to worship her. But reality wasn't so kind. At dinner one night, she casually dropped a comment, fishing for a reaction. Guys are so weird these days, she said, scrolling through her phone. I mean, I matched with a few guys, but most of them just want hookups. No effort at all. I took a slow sip of my beer. Shocking. She gave me a look. You haven't been trying yet, have you? Not really. Mia smirked. I figured. You're not exactly the type to jump into something like this. There was again that same assumption. That I'd sit here waiting while she had all the fun. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I don't know, Mia. I might surprise you. Her smirk faltered just a little. A few nights later, Sophie texted me again. What are you doing? I was on the couch, drinking a beer, flipping through Netflix. Mia had left hours ago for what she claimed was drinks with a friend. Nothing much, I replied. Want to grab a drink? My stomach tightened. This was a bad idea. I should have said no. Instead, I typed back. Where? 10 minutes later, I was in my car, driving toward a small bar just outside of town. Sophie was already there when I arrived. She was sitting at a corner booth, her hair pulled up into a loose ponytail, a half-empty cocktail glass in front of her. When she saw me, she smiled, but there was something playful about it, something teasing. I slid into the seat across from her. "So, what's this about?" She shrugged. "Ken, I just want to hang out with my favorite brother-in-law." I laughed. "I'm your only brother-in-law." "Exactly." She sipped her drink, watching me over the rim of her glass. "So, how's it going?" I knew what she meant. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "Mia's enjoying herself." "Yeah." Sophie tilted her head. "And you?" I hesitated. Then I said the one thing I knew would shift the energy between us. "I think I like having options." Sophie's lips parted slightly, and something flickered in her eyes. For a brief moment, she didn't look like Mia's little sister. She looked like a woman. "Good," she murmured. Silence stretched between us, thick with something unspoken. This was dangerous, and I didn't care. Meanwhile, Mia had her first date. She came home late, trying to be discreet, but I was awake, sitting on the couch when she walked in. She paused when she saw me, her expression unreadable. "You waited up?" I shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." She hesitated, then toed off her heels. "It was fine." That told me everything I needed to know. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice casual. Mia sighed, rolling her shoulders like she was exhausted. "I don't know. He was good-looking, but he was just arrogant. Like, he clearly thought I should be grateful he even agreed to the date." I nodded slowly. She watched me, waiting for me to say something, to reassure her, to comfort her. I didn't. Instead, I stood, stretched, and walked past her toward the bedroom. "Good luck with the next one," I said over my shoulder. She didn't respond. But as I closed the door, I knew one thing for sure. She had expected this to be easy. She had expected to win. She had no idea that I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was in the game now, and I had my own moves to make. A week had passed since Mia's first date, and she was trying to hide her frustration. She still went out a few nights a week, claiming she was meeting people, but she wasn't coming home with the same smug confidence she had when she first suggested the open marriage. I could see it in the way she avoided talking about her nights out, in the way she lingered around me a little longer than she used to, like she was trying to gauge whether I was struggling as much as she was. I wasn't, because unlike her, I wasn't chasing strangers. I had Sophie. It started with texts. Simple ones at first. "What are you up to? Mia tell you about her latest date yet? She's always been a little full of herself." Then, one night, Sophie took things a step further. "Hey, can we grab dinner?" I hesitated. I told myself it was a bad idea, that no good could come from sitting across from my wife's younger sister, drinking, laughing, feeling that subtle pull of something neither of us was ready to name. But I agreed anyway, because deep down, I wanted to see where this would go. She picked a quiet restaurant, the kind with dim lighting and booths tucked away in the corners. Sophie was already there when I arrived, wearing a black dress that wasn't flashy but still managed to hug her curves in all the right places. Her dark hair was loose over her shoulders, and when she looked up and smiled at me, I felt it. That pull. "Hey," she said, her voice warm. "Hey." I slid into the seat across from her, suddenly hyper-aware of how intimate this felt. A waiter came by, took our drink orders, and left us in silence. Sophie leaned back, studying me. "So," she said, dragging her straw through her drink, "how's the single life treating you?" I smirked. "Not exactly single, am I?" "Could have fooled me," she teased. I exhaled. "Mia's having a rough time." Sophie let out a low laugh. "Yeah, I figured. She really thought this was going to be easy, huh?" "She did." Sophie smirked, shaking her head. She never really appreciated what she had. Something about the way she said it made me pause. "What do you mean?" She hesitated for only a second, then leaned forward slightly, dropping her voice. "Jake, let's be real. Mia's always been selfish. She wanted an open marriage because she thought she'd win. She assumed she'd have men lined up for her while you sat at home, waiting." I swallowed. "And you don't think that's happening?" Her eyes flickered with something sharp. "I think she's losing." The air between us changed. I felt it, and I knew she did too. I could have stopped it there. I could have laughed, shrugged it off, changed the subject. But I didn't. Instead, I let my eyes linger on hers a little longer. Let my gaze drift down, taking away the low-cut dress dipped just enough to tease. Let myself wonder, just for a second, what it would be like if I wasn't Mia's husband, if Sophie wasn't her sister, if we had met under different circumstances. And judging by the way her breath hitched, I wasn't the only one thinking it. "Jake," she murmured. I waited, but she didn't finish, because before she could, the waiter appeared, setting down our drinks. The moment shattered, replaced by casual conversation, jokes, and stolen glances. Still, the tension never fully disappeared. It sat there between us, unspoken, waiting. Later that night, she texted me. "I had fun tonight. We should do it again." I stared at the message for a long time, my pulse thrumming. Then, finally I typed back, "Yeah, we should." And just like that, the game had changed. Mia came home late again. I was sitting on the couch, one arm draped lazily over the backrest, a beer in my hand, watching the door as she walked in. She tried to act casual, tossing her purse on the counter and running a hand through her hair, but I caught the subtle slump in her shoulders. The date hadn't gone well. "Good. Hey," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Hey," I replied smoothly, taking a sip of my drink. She hesitated. Normally, she'd drop little hints about her night, testing my reaction, waiting for any sign of jealousy or discomfort. But tonight, nothing. She exhaled and finally sat down across from me. "I went out with that guy I told you about." I raised an eyebrow. "The one from the app?" "Yeah, Jason." She forced a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He was, not what I expected." I leaned forward, playing the part of the concerned husband. "Oh," she let out a dry laugh. "You ever meet someone who looks amazing in pictures, but in real life, there's just nothing there?" I smirked. "You mean like every guy on Instagram?" I got a real laugh out of her, but it was short-lived. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know. I thought he'd be charming. He was hot, I'll give him that. But the second we sat down, I don't know, he talked about himself the entire time." I shrugged. "Sound about right." She shot me a look. "I thought dating would be different." "You thought it'd be easy." I corrected, my voice even. Her lips pressed together. I could see the cracks forming, the realization setting in. She had assumed she'd be juggling men by now, basking in attention, making me jealous. But instead, she was dealing with ghosting, arrogance, and men who weren't nearly as interested in her as she expected. And the best part? She had no idea that while she was out there failing, her little sister was texting me late at night. Sophie didn't wait long to reach out again. That night, after Mia had gone to bed, my phone buzzed. "Mia, strike out again." I chuckled to myself before responding. She's not loving the single life as much as she thought. The dots appeared immediately. Shocker. I could almost hear the amusement in her voice. Then, after a long pause, she sent another message. "You free tomorrow night? Need some advice on something." Advice, right? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I knew what this was. I knew what it could turn into. And I knew I should say no. Instead, I typed, "Yeah, where?" Her response was instant. "Meet me at O'Malley's. 8 p.m. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. This was a bad idea. A terrible, dangerous, intoxicating idea. And I was walking right into it. Meanwhile, Mia was desperate for a win. The next day, I overheard her on the phone, pacing the kitchen, frustration dripping from her voice. "No, I get it. You're busy," she said, forcing a laugh. "Maybe another time." A pause. Her smile faded. "Yeah, sure. A good one." She hung up and let out a frustrated sigh, slamming her phone down on the counter. I leaned against the doorway, watching. "Rough morning." She spun around, startled. "Jesus, Jake, don't sneak up on me." "Didn't mean to," I said, not bothering to hide my smirk. "Another dud?" Her jaw tightened. "He canceled. Said something came up at work." "That's too bad." I took a sip of my coffee, enjoying this way more than I should. "Guess you'll just have to keep trying." Mia shot me a glare, but she didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her phone and stormed out of the kitchen, probably off to find another match. She was struggling. She was frustrated. She thought she could have everything. Me at home, waiting, while she explored her options. But the game wasn't going how she expected. And she didn't realize that I was playing a whole different one. Because that night, while she was licking her wounds from another failed date, I was sitting across from Sophie at a dimly lit bar, watching as she leaned in just a little too close, her fingers brushing against my wrist as she laughed. I was supposed to be the one left behind, but it was Mia who was losing me. She just didn't know it yet. O'Malley's was dimly lit, the kind of bar where people tuck themselves into booths away from prying eyes. It wasn't the kind of place you took a date, not an official one, anyway. Sophie was already there when I walked in, sitting at the far end of the bar with a drink in front of her. She looked different tonight, her usual casual look replaced with something more deliberate. A fitted black top, dark jeans that hugged her hips, and just a hint of makeup that made her eyes stand out in a way I hadn't noticed before. She saw me and smiled, raising her glass. Look who actually showed up. I slid onto the stool beside her, motioning to the bartender. Whiskey neat. Then, turning to her, I smirked. I said I would. She tilted her head. Yeah, but I wasn't sure you'd go through with it. Why's that? She shrugged. You're a good guy. You don't strike me as someone who plays games. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Maybe I'm learning. Her lips curved slightly, but she didn't push it. Instead, she lifted her glass, taking a slow sip before speaking again. So, you ever going to ask me what I needed advice on? I chuckled. All right, I'll bite. What's so important that you needed my expert wisdom? Sophie swirled her drink in her glass, watching the liquid move before answering. Dating, she said finally. I figured since you're technically single now, you could give me some pointers. I raised an eyebrow. You need help dating? She smirked. Okay, maybe not help, but I don't know. You're a guy. I figured you'd have insight. Something about this felt off, like we were talking in circles, waiting for the real conversation to start. I leaned back, sipping my drink. You dating someone? Sophie hesitated. Not really, but you want to be? She exhaled, setting her glass down. I don't know what I want, Jake. The way she said my name sent a slow pulse of heat through me. I should have stopped this. I should have set a boundary, reminded myself who she was. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, thick with something unspoken. Finally, Sophie broke it. Do you ever think Mia made a mistake? I frowned. What do you mean? She turned to face me fully, her dark eyes searching mine. Do you think she really understood what she was doing when she asked for this? I scoffed. No. She thought she'd have men lined up, worshipping her. Sophie smirked. Yeah, that sounds like Mia. She was close now. Not in an obvious way, but enough that I could smell her perfume. Something light and sweet, completely different from Mia's usual expensive, overpowering scent. She bit her lip, hesitating. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, What if she loses you? Something snapped. I didn't think. I didn't stop to consider the consequences. I just reached for her. Sophie inhaled sharply as my hand brushed against her cheek, my fingers trailing down to her jawline. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into my touch. And then I kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't careful. It was impulsive, desperate, a collision of emotions I hadn't even fully processed yet. Her lips parted under mine, soft and warm, and for a moment, nothing else existed. No Mia, no open marriage, no lines we were dangerously close to crossing. Just Sophie. But then, she pulled back, her breath shaky, her fingers pressing against her lips like she couldn't believe what had just happened. Jake, she whispered. Reality crashed down around us. I clenched my jaw, dragging a hand through my hair as I exhaled sharply. Shit. Sophie swallowed hard, her face unreadable. We shouldn't have done that, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I nodded, even though every part of me was still screaming for more. I know. She hesitated for a long moment, then grabbed her bag. I should go. I watched her slip out of the bar, my pulse still hammering in my chest. I knew I should regret it, but I didn't, and that was the real problem. I told myself the kiss with Sophie was a mistake. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. But lies have a funny way of unraveling when the truth is too tempting to resist. Sophie and I didn't speak for 3 days after that night at O'Malley's. No texts, no calls, nothing. But I felt her absence like a weight in my chest. Mia, meanwhile, was oblivious too busy trying to salvage her disastrous attempt at an open marriage. Every night, she left the house looking for validation, for excitement. And every night, she came home looking more defeated than the last. She didn't realize that while she was chasing ghosts, I was right here, being seen by someone else, being wanted by someone else. Sophie was the first to break. On the fourth day, she texted me. I can't stop thinking about it. Neither could I, but I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit there, my heart pounding as I stared at the words. This was the moment I could stop it, draw the line before it went too far. But I didn't. Instead, I typed back, "Me either." The dots appeared instantly. Can we talk? Talk, right? I knew damn well that wasn't what we wanted to do. We met at her place. Mia thought I was out with friends, and Sophie's roommate was conveniently out of town. The second I stepped through the door, I knew we were past the point of no return. Sophie stood in the living room, biting her lip, her arms crossed like she was trying to hold herself back. But her eyes told me everything. She wanted this, just as badly as I did. I closed the door behind me, the air between us crackling with tension. "This is wrong," Sophie murmured. I nodded. "I know." She took a slow step forward, her breath shallow. "Then why are you here?" I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did. I was here because she saw me. Because she made me feel something Mia hadn't in years. Because when she looked at me like that, like I was the only man in the world, I couldn't bring myself to care about the consequences. Sophie swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she reached for me. I met her halfway. The second our lips collided, all the hesitation, all the guilt disappeared. This wasn't careful. This wasn't calculated. This was raw, desperate, years of neglect crashing down into a single moment of reckless need. Her hands were in my hair, my fingers gripping her waist, pulling her flush against me. I backed her against the couch, her breath hitching as she fell beneath me. "Jake," she gasped, her nails digging into my shoulders. I groaned, my lips trailing down her neck, her skin warm and soft beneath my mouth. I didn't think about Mia. I didn't think about what this would do to her. Because in that moment, Mia was nothing but a fading memory. And Sophie? Sophie was everything. It didn't stop there. That night ignited something between us, something neither of us could put out. We met in secret, stolen moments in hotel rooms, late-night drives to nowhere, quiet mornings where she curled up against me, tracing invisible patterns on my chest, whispering things I'd never thought I'd hear again. "You deserve to be loved, Jake," she told me once, her fingers threading through mine. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Mia still had no idea. She thought she was in control. She thought this was her game. But she didn't realize that while she was searching for something better, I had already found it. And it wasn't her. Mia had always been confident, borderline cocky. When she suggested the open marriage, she had believed, without a doubt, that she would be the one thriving while I floundered. But she wasn't thriving, and I wasn't floundering. I was winning. She just didn't know it yet. At first, she was too caught up in her own failures to notice anything had changed. She was frustrated, exhausted, trying to make something work that simply wasn't. But then, slowly, she started to notice things. The way I seemed lighter. The way I didn't react when she casually mentioned her dates anymore. The way I suddenly started taking my phone with me everywhere. At first, it was just small moments of hesitation. A fleeting look when I walked past her with my phone in hand. A pause before she spoke, like she was deciding whether or not to ask me something. But then, one night, she finally said it out loud. "You seem different." I looked up from my book, raising an eyebrow. "Different how?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Just different. Happier, maybe." I shrugged. "Maybe I am." Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time in weeks, I saw it. Doubt. She thought she had me figured out. She thought she knew how this would go. But for the first time, she was questioning herself. And I loved every second of it. Sophie and I were careful. We didn't text as much when Mia was around. We met in places where we wouldn't run into anyone who knew us. But no matter how careful you are, secrets have a way of making themselves known. It started with Mia's calls to Sophie going unanswered. Then the excuses. "I've been busy. Work's been crazy. We'll catch up soon, I promise." Mia never used to second-guess her sister. But after a while, I could see the wheels turning in her head. One night, after dinner, she set her fork down and looked at me carefully. Have you talked to Sophie lately? I didn't even blink. Not really. Why? She's been weird. Mia frowned. Dodging my calls, canceling plans. I don't know. It's not like her. I shrugged, taking a sip of my beer. Maybe she's got something going on. Maybe, but she didn't look convinced. I fought the urge to smirk. One night, after Mia had gone to bed, I got a text from Sophie. She's suspicious. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Then, a second message. We need to be more careful. I exhaled slowly, gripping my phone tighter. She was right. Mia was watching now. The question was, when would she finally see the truth? Mia wasn't stupid. For weeks, she had been trying to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut, the one that told her something wasn't right. She wanted to believe that she was still in control, that I was sitting at home waiting while she figured out her new life. But she wasn't in control anymore, and she was about to find out just how badly she had lost. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was in the shower when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of my phone vibrating on the bathroom counter. I ignored it at first, letting the steam wrap around me as I rinsed off. Then I heard Mia's voice. Who's Sophie? The world screeched to a halt. I turned off the water, my pulse hammering. I hadn't locked my phone. Fuck. I grabbed a towel and stepped out, finding Mia standing there holding my phone in both hands. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. But it was her eyes that hit me the hardest. She had finally seen the truth. I swallowed, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Mia. She held up the phone. You've been texting my sister. I exhaled, running a hand through my wet hair. Mia, I can explain. Explain what? Her voice was eerily calm, but I could see the storm brewing beneath the surface. That you've been sneaking around with my fucking sister behind my back. She threw the phone onto the counter with a sharp clatter, crossing her arms. Tell me the truth, Jake. How long has this been going on? Lying was pointless now. I met her gaze, my voice low. A while. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Jesus Christ, you really fucking did it. I didn't say anything. She turned away, gripping the edge of the sink like she needed something to hold on to. I knew something was off. I knew she was acting weird, but I never thought. She stopped, her shoulders rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then, slowly, she turned back to face me. And when she spoke again, her voice was quiet. Did you sleep with her? I hesitated. Her jaw clenched. Don't you dare lie to me, Jake. I exhaled, my chest tightening. Yes. Her face crumpled. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at me like she was trying to process the wreckage of everything she had built. Then she let out a sharp, broken laugh. I thought I was the one who was supposed to be winning this, she whispered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mia, you pushed me away. You wanted this. She snapped her head up, eyes blazing. I wanted freedom, Jake. I didn't want this. I didn't respond, because deep down, we both knew the truth. She had assumed she would win. She had assumed I would be the one left behind. She had never even considered the possibility that I might find someone else, that I might find her sister. Mia's hands trembled as she braced herself against the counter. She looked like she might be sick. Then, in a whisper, she asked the one question I knew was coming. Do you love her? Silence. The longest, heaviest silence of my life. I could have lied. I could have spared her the final blow. But instead, I looked her in the eye and said the only thing I knew to be true. I don't know. Mia inhaled sharply, like I had physically struck her. She nodded slowly, stepping back like she needed to put space between us. Wow. I ran a hand down my face, exhaustion pressing against my bones. Mia, don't. She held up a hand. Just don't. Her eyes were red now, glossy with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to keep it together. And then, with a cold, hollow laugh, she said the words that changed everything. You know what, Jake? You're right. I frowned. What? You're right, she repeated, her voice steadier now. I did push you away, and I made a mistake. But you... She let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. You fucked my sister. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She wiped at her face, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. I hope she was worth it. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked out. I stood there for a long time after she was gone, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Mia had lost, but somehow it didn't feel like I had won. Mia didn't come home that night. I didn't know where she went, and honestly, I didn't ask. A part of me expected her to come storming back through the door, screaming, throwing things, demanding answers, demanding me. But she didn't. Instead, she vanished. And for the first time since this whole thing started, the house felt too quiet. Not peaceful, not freeing, just empty. I barely slept. My mind kept replaying her face, the way her breath hitched when I admitted I'd slept with Sophie, the way her hands had trembled when she asked me if I loved her. And my answer, I don't know, because I didn't know. But I knew that I needed to see Sophie, not just because of Mia, not just because of the fallout. I needed to know if we were real. The next day, I called Sophie. She answered on the first ring. Jake. Her voice was soft, uncertain, like she already knew. She found out, I said. Sophie let out a slow breath. I figured. She saw the messages. A pause. Did you tell her everything? Yeah. Silence. Then, after a moment, she whispered, Are you okay? That question caught me off guard. Was I okay? I wasn't sure. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't drowning in guilt. But I was something heavy, something restless. I don't know, I admitted. Sophie hesitated. Then, finally she said, Come over. And I did. When I got to Sophie's apartment, she was already waiting at the door. She was barefoot, wearing an oversized sweater that hung just low enough to show the curve of her thigh. Her hair was loose, a little messy, like she had been running her hands through it all morning. She looked nervous. She stepped aside to let me in, then closed the door behind me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. Jake, what happens now? I ran a hand down my face, exhaling slowly. I don't know. Did she say anything else? I shook my head. She just left. Sophie bit her lip, nodding. She walked to the couch, sitting down with her knees pulled up, her arms wrapped around them. I sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but not touching. We sat there in silence for a long time. Finally, Sophie spoke. You know she's never going to forgive either of us, right? I let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, I figured. Sophie turned to face me fully, her dark eyes searching mine. Then she said the words that hit me harder than anything Mia had. I don't regret it, Jake. I inhaled sharply. Sophie's fingers curled around the edge of her sweater, her knuckles white. I know I should. I know this is insane. But I don't regret it. My chest tightened, because I didn't either. She swallowed. I've wanted you for years, Jake. Longer than I should have. She gave a broken laugh, shaking her head. And when Mia opened that door, when she made you available, I couldn't stop myself. I stayed quiet, because I knew. I had felt it too. The way she looked at me, the way she listened, the way she had always been there. Long before Mia ever realized she was losing me, Sophie had seen me. Sophie looked down, her voice barely a whisper. You don't have to choose me. You don't have to do anything. I reached for her hand. She sucked in a breath as I laced my fingers with hers. Sophie, I murmured. She looked up, and just like that, I knew. I had chosen, and it wasn't Mia. It had never been Mia. Mia didn't come home. Not that night. Not the next. A week passed, and she still hadn't returned. I heard from a mutual friend that she was staying at a hotel downtown. Apparently, she told people she needed space, but I knew the truth. She wasn't coming back. Not to me, not to us. And honestly, I didn't want her to, because while Mia was licking her wounds, I was with Sophie. We stopped hiding. We didn't announce it to the world, but we stopped pretending. If Mia had opened the door for herself, then she sure as hell had opened it for me, too. And I walked right through it. When the inevitable confrontation finally came, it wasn't with Mia. It was with her parents. Her father, Robert, called me first. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the simmering anger beneath it. You need to come over, he said. Is Mia there? I asked. Just get here. The line went dead. I almost didn't go. I almost decided it wasn't my problem anymore. But something told me this wasn't just about Mia. This was about Sophie, too. So I went. When I arrived at Mia's parents' house, her mother barely looked at me. She was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, staring out the window like she couldn't bear to acknowledge my presence. Mia was nowhere to be seen. But Robert? He was waiting. The second I stepped inside, he closed the door behind me, his expression hard. "Seed." I did. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then, finally he spoke. "You really fucked up, Jake." I exhaled, leaning forward. "I know." He scoffed. "Do you?" "Because I don't think you do." I stayed silent. He ran a hand down his face, shaking his head. "Look, I won't pretend that Mia was perfect. She can be selfish. She's always had a certain way of thinking about the world." I almost laughed at the understatement. "But you married her, Jake," he continued. "You made a commitment to her." I clenched my jaw. "She's the one who wanted an open marriage. And you're the one who fucked her sister," he snapped. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then Robert exhaled, sitting back. "Do you love her?" It wasn't the first time someone had asked me that. But this time I had an answer. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Edo." His jaw tightened. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. "Then you'd better not fuck this up, too." I blinked. "What?" Robert sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mia's done with you. That much is obvious. But Sophie? She isn't like her sister. She actually feels things. She's not just looking for the next best thing. If you're going to be with her, then you'd better be damn sure about it." I swallowed, my chest tightening. Because I was sure. I had never been more sure of anything. I stood, meeting his gaze. "I am." Robert stared at me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Then go." The fallout was brutal. Mia refused to speak to Sophie. Their parents tried to mend things, but it was useless. The damage was done. Some people took Mia's side. Others accepted that this was our choice now. Either way, I didn't care. Because Sophie was mine, and I wasn't going to let her go. Months later, as I lay in bed with Sophie curled up beside me, her breath warm against my skin, I thought about everything that had led me here. The open marriage, the betrayal, the choices. And I realized something. Mia had thought she was setting herself free. But in the end, I was the one who had been set free. And I had never felt more alive.